Okay, just while we get settled, we have a quorum around the table. We'll move on with members' business. Any leaves of absence can be communicated to the Mayor's office. Any matters of an urgent nature, none have been communicated to me. We have nothing under item 9, so we move on to reports. And the first report is 10.1, Land Information Memoranda, Updated Coastal Erosion and Inundation Hazard Information. And we have Steve Cody and Chris Pivan. And I'll pass over to staff.
Thank you. This paper responds back to a request at the Strategy Ops and Finance meeting on the 13th of February for us to come back today to discuss an update to Land Information Memoranda in relation to coastal hazard risk. We're going to take the paper as read. You will note in the paper a recommendation to update the LIM. The actual detail that will go onto LIMs is in the paper. For those interested, it is on page 8 of the paper. I'm going to hand over to Steve Cody, who is our building manager and who manages the process for updating LIMs, to just provide a short opening, and then we would move to questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Good morning, everybody. So as we discussed with the council on Tuesday, the purpose of the paper was to walk you through how we manage the LIM process and also how we manage updating the LIMs as new information comes through. As I explained at that particular point in time, that information can be property specific or it could be district-wide specific. And we review the information, and decision is made in accordance with our processes around whether or not it is appropriate to update the information on the LIMs. This is effectively a business as usual process. I'll take the paper as being read. Do you have any questions?
I just want to clarify before we move on. Business as usual would be just to update the LIMs. It doesn't usually come to council for approval. The reason this has come to council is because it's the subject of a notice of motion. Is that right?
That's correct.
Great. Councillor Wilson?
I just wanted to acknowledge that this is the consequence of a notice of motion that was brought by Councillor Cooper, and a well thought through notice of motion. I don't think it was a response to a judicial review or anything.
So are you wanting to move and do opening
Yes, I
remarks?
do. Yeah, I'm happy to move this, but I did have a question as well. So yeah, I'll move it. Quentin Paul.
Okay, so seeing as you've moved it, I need a seconder, but we can keep on with questions.
Yep.
So just because that kind of formed part of an introductory remark.
Okay.
So seconded by Councillor Warwick. That's A, B and C on page 6 of councillor agendas, but feel free to ask questions.
Cool. Okay, so I'll take that as part of my opening remarks, but Quentin Paul asked about the inclusion of a New Zealand coastal policy statement. Is there any particular issues with including that, if we had in mind to?
The paper itself only makes reference to reports and a response from the Ministry for the Environment and the Department of Conservation. There's a link in the LIM that takes you to a coastal science page. On the coastal science page is a link to the coastal policy statement. So do agree that it's relevant and it is available for people to look at.
Okay.
So I'll just finish questions, then I'll come back to you for opening remarks.
Okay.
Councillor Brabant, Prof, did you have a question? Councillor Halliday?
Sorry, through you, Madam Chair. I just want to clarify with regards to the information on the limbs and on the page, all the information is treated equally. Is that correct? Like the Jacobs report and the DeLonghi report, they're both treated the same way in the limb, and that they both have a link to that coastal hazard risk science, which sits on the KCDC page. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Effectively, the limb is there just to provide the information council holds. And I suppose from my team's perspective, we're just passing that information on. So
But
it
that-
has effectively equal standing. We don't provide any views on what council may think. It's just, this is the information we hold.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Mr. Larissy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So just a question that I think is probably on the minds of some people. Given that something like the Jacobs, what we call the Jacobs report for the purpose of the conversation, appeared on people's limbs without people even knowing, why has it taken a notice of motion from a councillor for the DeLonghi report to be added? Why wasn't it just added?
I think I'll open a response and pass on to Steve for further comment. Our opening comment about limbs more generally is that we receive information on a constant basis. We have a process that we go through where we essentially look at what comes in to make sure that it's something that we would specify on a limb. So I think we've been clear that we have been, across a variety of parts of our business, open to receiving new information. It's just gone into our process. We actually in December did note that we had other information, following which the team has gone through a process to say they think it's appropriate now to do what they have done. So whilst we are responding to a notice of motion today, the other thing that we put on the table is that we have been going through our process. It is the process we have in place. It is what we follow. Steve, did you want to add any further comments?
Nothing really. Probably only just as an observation. I made the comment on Tuesday that as we gain more and more information, we will just keep adding things into the limbs. And as I sort of said when I sort of opened, we add information to a limb as it comes through to us, and we regularly receive requests from property owners to add information to a limb, and we consider that based on whether it's appropriate to add that information or not. So this is just part of that process.
Okay. So do I take from that what you're saying is the DeLonghi report would have been added anyway, but it was a question of timing?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Could I ask the public gallery to refrain from reacting? We don't do that around the table, and I expect the same from the public gallery. Thank you. Councillor Pravanov.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just following up on one of the comments that Mr. Paul made in relation to the maps. And I know that when we had the briefing on Tuesday, a comment was made that they hadn't been provided to council staff. I've just been looking at the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act, and it says in there, matters which shall be included in the memorandum are information known to the authority. So it doesn't actually say necessarily provided to the authority. So I'm just trying to understand the difference between what has been provided to council via a link versus what has been provided as a separate document, but saying that Mr. Quentin Paul also said that all those maps had been provided in hard and soft copy to council staff.
I'll make the comment that we have been sent a link to the website, and that is soft copy, and that is what we have used here. We have put in on and we're talking about the Coastal Science website, not the actual limb here, right? So the Coastal Science website sets out the detail on our council's commission report because we have that, and through our process and the last couple of years, we've made that information available to people. We have included a link to the DeLonghi report. There's also other information on that page outside of this, which is relevant to this topic, which is also linked. There's a series of maps, and people are able to connect and link to those. In terms of providing separate sets of maps and a whole range of things, it would take more work to put all of that into a space that was easy for someone to navigate. And I will say, without it becoming quite confusing, because even within the maps that you can connect to related to the existing maps, there is a lot of information and in detail on there, and there's a guide on how to use it. So at this stage, we have linked other information via a portal to connect to other websites or pages where, though, that information is hosted.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Pravanov?
Yes, thank you. So obviously, this addition to the LIM has been requested through a motion. I suppose the other side of this is that there is a judicial review.
If you're making remarks, can you save them for debate, please? Unless it's a question.
I have a question, yes. So obviously going down the judicial review process will be costly and time consuming. Is council going to be talking to Crew about I suppose the contents on the way that these new words have actually been set up on the LIM? That's my question.
I'll kick off and pass over to our Chief Executive or Steve if they want to make any further comments. We have shared with you in terms of the LIM commentary itself what we've already proposed as our update as went live on the 4th of March, and it does note the DeLonghi report, it does note Jacobs report, and it provides a link to our Coastal Science webpage. We acknowledge that over time, as we get new information, and that will continue to evolve in terms of the LIM statement itself, to align to the most relevant information that's available for people to consider. Our Coastal Science website, we updated to reflect where we believe the current information is at. If anyone has feedback or concerns about that page, and I will note there was a question about whether one of the dates is right. I'm going to go back and just confirm that we've got the right information there, so thank you for that feedback. Always open to people giving us feedback at our website, so happy to engage and discuss that. I'm not going to comment separately on the judicial review, so that's it for me, but I'm not sure if you wanted to say anything else.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Pravanov. More than happy, and actually we are talking to Crew. We talk to Crew quite regularly. I would make the comment, and I reflect back to a comment that Quentin Paul made when he was here discussing the DeLonghi report with you, is that we've been very open, very transparent, and provided them with a lot of information to support that report. So are we talking to Crew? Yes. Are we continuing to talk to Crew? Yes. And we will continue to work to find solutions where possible.
Thank you.
Councillor Coe.
Thank you. Yes, look, I understand that the government is looking at changing the regulations or our requirements around what we put on LIMs. And I just want to know whether that's likely to result in a further revision of what we have on LIMs in relation to this topic, and what the timing of that might be. So in other words, whatever changes we may make now, or in fact the changes are already in place, I gather, as of the 4th of March. We've already changed the wording on the LIMs. But are further changes likely, and what might be the timing of that in response to what the government will be requiring us to do further down the track?
So in respect of those proposed changes, we're still yet to see the final detail. And the changes are being put through by the Department of Internal Affairs, and the intention was to provide a reader of a LIM with more information. From what we've seen around the proposal so far, there's an intention to provide a lot more detail around natural hazards, and it's natural hazards across the board. So where obviously the proposal is that a LIM would, and this would apply to the entire country, a LIM would include all information about natural hazards at a high level, and if there's any reports, it would include a brief summary of the report, authors and things like this. Now, the changes that we've made to date reflect where we believe those longer term regulations will go, but again, we're yet to see the detail. It's proposed that the regulations will come into force after 1 July this year, but obviously we are yet to see that.
Right. So there may not be further changes to what's on LIMS on this topic.
Yes, there could be more detail, but
Yeah.
we're yet to sort of see whether the government will sort of go down that path.
Right. Thank you.
Mr. Olsen.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just having a look at the page, the coastal hazards risk page, which the link goes to, I believe. And I do have to question the wording that has been used and the weight that has been put onto this. So the reason is, the first one is, of course, the Jacobs report's titled Council Commission Science, whereas the Longy report is titled Community Commissioned Information. So, one of them saying this is science and this is saying information. I would have to question the wording choice. The other thing is that there's quite a
So are you
bigger-
asking a question?
There was a question.
Because Councillor Wilson has a right of introduction before we go into full
that was
debate.
the question, yeah. So I was just questioning the wording on that. So that was my question, is why is the wording being
Okay,
chosen?
great.
That one says science and the other one says information. My second question is the weighting of it. There's quite a lot written on here about the Council Commission Science, but which comes first, and then of course the Longy report comes second in quite a small section. So if I was to come in unbiased and look at this, you look at the weighting of it and you'd see there is a way that can be done to make it feel a bit more evenly weighted. If otherwise it does feel like the council is biased against one to the other. So that's what I'm going to say. Thank you.
Please refrain from reactions from the public gallery. I've said it once. Oh, please do try and exercise some self-control. Thank you. Chris.
Thank you. I'm going to start with, at the very top of our website, you'll note there's a section on coastal hazard risk science, and we've set out a section just trying to put some context to this to say that there is various information that has been produced around coastal hazard risk, and that we are starting the process to work through updating our coastal provisions in our operative district plan. Underneath that, it does go into council commissioned science, and I do take the point, and again, feedback is welcomed. We aren't actually trying to differentiate between one being science and not, so that can clearly say council commissioned information. The reason that there's detail in here around the council commissioned information is because we had a series of reports that, as you know, progressed through Takatai Kapiti, and there isn't just one report. There's a volume 1, a volume 2 and a volume 3. We have transitioned the information that pertains to the coastal hazard risk signs to this page from what was the Te Kato Kapiti page. We did not want to lose information that we had shared so that it was all publicly available. And it might be nice if it was contained into a single thing, but it is not. And so for transparency, we've continued to set out our information. And that's the same with the rest of the detail in there. So it's not a matter of trying to weight one or the other. It's ensuring that we can share the information and content that council has produced and worked through. It's sharing information that we've had from others. You'll see there's another section called other information, and that is not as detailed either. So we're just trying to ensure that we maintain our openness, transparency, and history, if you like, of information on this matter.
Okay, thank you. Look, I'm going to make a suggestion as a question, is why, we couldn't do this. Is one way that could be to make it a bit more evidence that there is more information there.
If we're going to wordsmith the website, could we please take that offline, Councillor?
No, just let me ask.
Mr.
This
Olsen?
will be very quick, okay. Would it be possible to, in between the section and the council commission there, just have an index? Just put the council information and the next one and all the others. So from the top of it, we know what information is available on the page instead of having to scroll down to find out what's there.
Thank you. There is an index on the page in grey. If that's not as clear as it could be, we'll take that feedback as a presentational issue and have a look at it.
That's what it is, just a presentation. Yeah, thank you.
So I just don't want to be wordsmithing the website or the limbs today. Yeah, great. It's a good suggestion though. Councillor Pravanov?
Yeah, so just following up on Mr. Olsen, and Madam Mayor, I know you mentioned the word wordsmith, but the word information, which is following community commission, be changed to report?
We've already heard that they're going to take that into consideration and look at that, Councillor Pravanov, in a previous response.
I think it's important to have a decision on that before we make our.
I think we've heard that that is definitely possible.
Okay.
We can't make changes today, but we've heard that, and staff are going to have a look at it. I think that answers that question, Chris. So we'll move to right of introduction. Before I do, I'll just acknowledge a couple of people online in case they want to contribute to debate. We have Frank Hippolyte from Te Atiawa Ki Whakarongotai, and we have Hurawai Paki from Ngāti Toa here online. Okay, so Councillor Wilson, right of introduction. It's been moved and seconded by Councillor Warwick.
Yeah, just start by noting that this is, in fact, noting recommendations. There is a delegated authority already in place, so the wordsmithing, I'm sure you're just thrilled to hear all our suggestions, but that's what they are rather than instructions. That's kind of how that works, right? I just want to start by acknowledging Councillor Cooper and the work that he has done on getting the notice of motion up. And I have to say, for those historians out there who want to record this, Councillor Cooper's notice of motion began its construction well prior to any notice of a judicial review from CRU. So it wasn't. This wasn't a consequence of a legal threat that this came up. This came up prior to that. What it is a consequence of is public feedback. So Councillor Cooper and most of us around the table, we heard a lot of public feedback. So I would preface this by just saying how grateful I am to CRU for the huge work that they did in commissioning the DeLonghi report. It didn't just pop out of the sand. It was an expensive process for them. I also want to acknowledge what the Chief Executive said, and that is that the DeLonghi report was a consequence of Dr. DeLonghi's work, which was absolutely aided by Council. Council provided a lot of information that went into the DeLonghi report. Council didn't hold back. There were no OIAs required. The information that Dr. DeLonghi sought was freely given. So I wanted to acknowledge that as well. Just people have talked about the section 44A2, which is of the Act, which central government legislation is dancing around that as we speak. So it's when DIA finally come back with something, there'll be further impacts on LIM reports, and so council has to deal with that. And just lastly, people have talked about the insurance industry, a favourite topic of mine, about how the LIM reports affect the insurance industry. If there was a decision handed down by God that said there's nothing to worry about on your coast here in the Kapiti Coast, anyone who thinks the insurance industry would suddenly say, well, we need to reduce their premiums, is living on a different part of the planet than me. The insurance industry find their own research to justify their constant and ever increasing premium costs. So that's another issue aside. But I do think, from a broadly public point of view, this is something to absolutely be celebrated. This is a debate that's been going on for a decade or so. This is a significant step forward, and I think everybody should be acknowledging that this is a good thing that's happening. There ends my little speech.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Coe.
Thank you. Look, I think this is a moving feast. Obviously, we seek to continually improve the amount of information that's available on LIMS, make sure that it is clearly identifying risks and hazards and so on. And there are changes happening in terms of the regulations around this. The changes that we are noting today are already in place. I think there was a good point made by the speaker from Kapiti Calm that people aren't always aware of what exactly is on their LIM report. And I believe we do need some good comms in this area to, and because it is such a contentious issue, to let people know in some way, whatever is a cost-effective way to do that, of what the current wording is around this, because it is on all LIMS in the area. Just as a matter of courtesy to the members of the public, so that they are aware of what is there now, and to give them the link that goes through to the Coastal Science page. I think that's really, really important that we do that. So
Thank you for that suggestion. We'll
thank you.
follow up on that. Any further contribution? I'll put that to the vote. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. And we'll move on to item. Thank you, both of you. Thanks, Steve. 10.2 Local Water Done Well consultation document. So we have Martin Cole and Sean Mallon to present this very, very important paper, which has huge implications for our future in the district. And we've had some comments today around our consultation requirements, and I hope they can be answered as part of this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, morning to everybody. As is mentioned, you have in front of you today a decision required on the consultation document linking to the government's requirements around local water done well. And I was going to address, there were several comments raised in public speaking today which actually highlight some of the difficulties that we've presented to you through this process, and how we're dealing with those, I guess. And so in response to, I think there was the reference to the different bills that we're working with. So this paper you have in front of you today is basically as a consequence of the Water Services Preliminary Arrangements Act. Now that was passed and written into legislation on the 2nd of September 2024. Now that Act sets in place the requirements that we're responding to now around looking at a wilderness services delivery plan. That sets out the requirements around consultation. That document sets out the requirement to consult on two options, and that sets in place the timeline. Now, I think that was also raised today by the Concerned Ratepayers of Kapiti, the time frames that we're working in, and I know this has been raised before, the tight time frame that we're having to work within to get this work done. So this work today is based on that, and we have legal advice that says the current document that you have in front of you complies with that legislation. One of the other issues that was raised again today was the Water Services Bill, which is Bill 3 basically. Now, that has not been passed into law. That was put out for consultation late December. That consultation closed last week, I think, and that Act has another list of 34 pages worth of a significant amount of other of requirements in there that is not yet law. And in that bill, which again was referenced today, I think twice, clause 26, I think it is, does include a requirement for an additional option over and above the two. So that I think highlights the level of, the information that we're trying to deal with and the rate at which some of that is changing. So, and council is obliged to act on legislation as it stands at the moment and not try and predict what that legislation may look like once the consultation process is closed. And a number of people have raised that through the submission process, the confusion that adds to the process. So we are presenting what we're legally required to do under that second bill, and I think there's reference to it in the paper. That's been reviewed by Council's legal counsel in terms of its compliance with what's required there. The other issue, certainly the amount of information that's there. So the document at the moment, I think it's about 34, 35 pages long, and we've tried to put as much in there, and I think a couple of councillors referenced trying to make it readable and useful to everyone, understanding that some people may want more information. So certainly heard what people have said today. There is a lot more information available. There are additional papers. There's a paper that came to the council prior to Christmas that set us on that path outside of the southern option, which was the Wellington Water, the combined regional entity. So that paper is on the website, but what we do is actually put a link into the consultation document that will bring people to all of that information, and we'll have a chat about trying to consolidate that. But there is a lot available on the council website, so absolutely we're happy to do that, and we were intending to add, we're working on the moment at FAQs, a whole list of those. We're just finishing off some extra work in terms of the long-term capital numbers and debt numbers as well, so all of that stuff will be available through the website, and we'll put a link into the document itself. There was another issue there that was raised, I think, which is pertinent to some of the information in the paper, and that was the level of debt associated with council's 3 water assets, and that being disproportionate to the relative value or percentage that they reflect on the council's overall bottom line. And the $166 million, $167 million was the figure there that was mentioned. And I think there's the two things there. If you look at the LTP numbers, the budget for this year for the 3 waters is $38.5 million, which is more than 50% of the council's spend in that capital area. So there's not a direct link between the value. It's more, and certainly those costs associated with 3 waters can be significantly more than some of the other areas that we work on. But I think it's key, if you look at those costs, some of those graphs in the paper that talk to other councils' investment needs, and the reason why councils' needs are possibly not as high as some of those others is because of the rate of investment that is already reflected in those assets over the last 10 to 15 years. So, but again, happy to provide more of that information if people would like that. And the other, I think there was a question around OIRs or official information requests. Absolutely, we will endeavour to provide that information as quickly as we can, but often it's difficult if you have an OIR that has 40 or 30 separate questions associated with it, it does take time to pull that information together. But I think we do have a lot more information that we can make available, and then we will do our best to provide responses to people in a timely way so that they can use that as part of their submission. So that's just on those references this morning, and I'll hand over to Martin now, who can briefly introduce the paper and get onto that.
Okay.
Actually,
Sure.
but before we do, thanks for those reassurances, Sean, and for those responses. And I hope that provides a level of comfort that we're going to provide information in a timely way, that we're going to make sure that that information that's requested is readily available. So thank you for that. Martin?
Okay. Madam Mayor. Thank you. I'll just take you through a bit of an overview, if you like, of the paper itself. You've got the consultation document and the detail in there. It's about 36 odd pages long. Today we're asking for a decision about the adoption of the consultation document and to consult with the community on the options that are presented. There are two options in the consultation document that we've narrowed it down to as required by the Preliminary Arrangements Act. The requirement is to provide at least two of those options. One option being and the preference is the in-house business unit option, to retain in-house, and the alternative option is to take that into a separate council water services organisation with 3 other councils, which is Kapiti, Horowhenua, Manawatu and Palmerston North is the other option that's presented in the consultation document.
Great, thank you. Any questions? Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, given that we have to act under current law, and so the current legislation determines 2 options. So the first question is, does current legislation allow for consultation of more than 2, or is 2 prescriptive?
So the legislation specifies that at least 2 options, one being the current status quo, if you like, and the other one being one of the alternatives.
Okay, and so given that, and given that clause 26 of the upcoming legislation is likely to create just further central government chaos to reign on local government, so we went out with the 2 option, then the central government's legislative program changes the rules and says you have to have 3 or more. Does that mean we would have to go back out and consult again? And so in anticipation of central government making that change, should we not just include a 3rd option now? And then when clause 26, if and when that passes, we're already covered rather than having to start again? Or what might the process be?
That could be one pathway, I guess. There are, as we mentioned, I think there's 30 odd pages in that bill. Multiple potential changes in terms of how that might look when it becomes legislation. So the legal advice we have is the greatest certainty that you have is over the current bill and the requirements to progress with that. So that's the basis for the paper today. I think, and also when we make that further information available, I think there was, I'm not sure it was Michael, there was a reference to a separate council CCO being, why isn't that part of the 3? And that I think was referenced, that could be the 3rd. And again, if we highlight and make available, so we had several public briefings that were open, and there were presentations in those briefings, and there were papers substantiating why that option wasn't taken further. And the main one was the significant cost associated with setting up a CCO. So if you establish a CCO, you have to then set up a separate governance. You've got 2 separate boards, an independent board, another council board. You've got a chief executive, you've got a general managers, you've got that entity has to stand up in its own right. And at the time, in terms of benefit, the only benefit, and again, there's some conversation in the paper about this, and it was certainly at that workshop, is the ability to borrow at a greater rate than you might currently be able to, and to push the local government funding associations up. You push your borrowing up to 500% of your revenue. So in the council, again, and that comes back to that key issue around the level of investment and how much we've invested and how much we need to invest, that conversation about why would you want to borrow up to a significantly higher amount when you don't need to, and then incur the costs of setting up a CCO, because it doesn't really provide a huge number of other benefits, because we're only 24,000 connections in Kapiti. So to set up a new entity and a new organisation with all of those overheads, it just didn't seem to make sense. So again, all of that information is available, and we'll make that available on the link through the website.
Yeah, and just in relation to that, as my final question is about that. We just had the conversation about the LIM reports, and in response to why, and just in terms of the numbers, 167 million was mentioned, and of course the fact is that because Kapiti Council is so far ahead of the pack in terms of its water work and provision, you know, we really are. That's one of the reasons why you wouldn't want to go with Wellington Water, presumably. So, perhaps some other reasons as well, but that'd be one of them. And I'm not quite sure that we've sent that message out so that that it is clear to people, and so maybe some comms around this, just where we're at and how we got to the options that we got. Because I'm picking up that some people might think that, oh, we've just gone for a couple of quick options and we haven't considered others. We've had a number of workshops where other options certainly were investigated, right? And the public may not necessarily be aware of that. So
We did have a press release after the meeting where we decided not to join the Wellington Water entity.
Yeah.
And I did a number of radio interviews about that as well.
Yeah.
But certainly we'll give some context and background when we go out with our press releases around this and our communications. And we'll also make that other information clear.
So I still have
quite
the
an
look.
extensive report that came to that council meeting that had the attachments associated with it, I think, in terms of some of the financial modelling that had been done to get to that point and make that decision.
It still
and it's
is
not Wellington Water, by the way, because
No.
Wellington Water doesn't own the assets. It's
No.
a new entity
Yeah.
with the same councils as Wellington Water, just making that clear.
Well, it will be eventually,
It will
presumably.
be anyway.
Yeah. So that's still my live question, and that is in anticipation of Clause 26 kicking in at some stage where more than two options will be required. I'm just thinking that it makes sense to have a third option. These aren't the third
Sorry,
options.
Councillor Wilson, as elected members, we gave a clear steer to staff in one of those open workshops that we were going to go with these two options. We now have a consultation document that's been prepared around that. So it's either, I think, at this stage, we either accept that consultation document or we don't.
No, there's nothing directive about it. It was a question. So the question is, if we were to put in a third option, can that be done later? Is there a process for meeting that legislative requirement without we sign off today on this consultative options, and then what happens if Clause 26 kicks in, and then we have to do it all again with its attendant costs?
Well, again, it's not a legislative requirement. So that again is one of the. There has been a lot of feedback across the sector to suggest that will change because councils are already. So the legislation won't be enacted till. You'd expect probably June, July, possibly. Consultation closes. There needs to be submissions, hearings. There needs to be, it's unlikely. Well, I'm not going to say it would be impossible, but to try and fit in more work between whenever that's enacted and the 3rd or the 5th of September of this year, which is when we have to have this submitted to the DIA, would be impossible. And the cost already, as mentioned in the paper, the time frame associated with this, the directive to get on with it, there was no ability to incorporate that into the annual plan process in terms of budget. So further work on top of that, and this would be the same for a lot of councils across the country. So you'd have to hope that that would not be the case, and there may be a requirement if you are looking at changing again in the future that you have to then pick up the requirements of that legislation. But I think for the government to then say that you should retrospectively undo everything they've asked you to do in Bill 2 because they've changed direction 2 months before that requirement is to be complied with would be difficult, and I'm not sure how well received that would be. So,
Councillor Warwick?
Mine's just around the OIA stuff that was brought up and the fact sheet. So can the fact sheet, when people do, because this is going to be, we're going to get a lot of questions, or you guys are, not us, maybe us. When that's sent out, can it have all the links that have been suggested on that fact sheet with a, you know, a general bang, here's the fact sheet. If you need any, please submit an OIA if you need any further information, which would take away that automatic into an OIA process, which holds everyone up. Is
Right.
that what typically happens, or could it happen so that you kind of, people have the ability to access that information if they need and come back if they don't, because that will save a lot of everyone's time.
so absolutely, we would look to link
Everything.
FAQs or whatever that system looks like with, if it's documents or questions that people have asked through the OIR process, well, we would do that. I mean, the underlying commitment really is we want people to have as much information as we can provide them to give an informed position back through the process. So if we can do it, I mean, there's no, again, as I mentioned before, the OIR process enables us to track requests, and often when there's a lot coming through, the ability to reference and track them and make sure that they're actually complied with is significant. But if we can get them answered and we can get them back out, then we'll be doing exactly that. And we already have, I think Mr. Andrews, there's already some in the system, and there are questions in there that we can look at and say, look, okay, well that one, you know, is relevant, and we'll put it in the FAQs, or the response to it would go there. And so, but again, I can't, if someone provides 10 pages of 100 questions that relate to every piece of financial information for the Three Waters for the last 20 years, then that's going to be difficult to provide that in a timely manner to put it into a submission. But
So are you able as staff to respond by saying, here is the fact sheet with links to the to information. If you require more information, please get back to us. Just to stop that load on staff,
okay.
and also the wait for the people who are wanting information. I
Yes.
just think it would maybe give them an option.
yes,
Not to,
yes. So rather than waiting, not knowing, and thinking they're going to have to wait 20 days, or we'll let them know early that this is what we can provide, which is what we do currently. If we have a long list of questions, we will go back and say, look, if you can reduce that to the stuff that's more relevant, we'll give you those ASAP. Or if that is a substantial amount of work, then we'd have a conversation about cost as well. But we're always endeavouring to try and get that information back. So yeah, I hear what you're saying. Make it clear to someone, look, we can provide you this now. If if you want more than that, then that might take over and above what's required. But as I've said, there's a lot of that information already on the website, the LTP, a lot of the financials, and we've got other work that's been done that, again, we'll reference all those presentations that we provided as part of the public workshops, and the gravel road report, which was the one that was done for the Wellington region options. All of that is available, but just too much information to make readily available. If you're in a consultation document, there's quite a tome of.
Sorry, Councillor
Yeah.
Warwick, your microphone's not on. I think your point has been made, and that's a really good clarification around how we're going to communicate those and answer questions. Councillor Coe?
Thank you. Yes, look, I'm just putting on my ratepayer hat for a minute and thinking, well, tells me that I'm going to pay $2,000 a year or more, whatever, for water rates. What does that mean in terms of the other rates that I pay? Because we're talking here about a substantial component of what council does. You know, depending how you measure it, say a third probably of our total operations is going to be ring-fenced in this way. So there'll be a separate system for collecting revenue for that component, what does that mean for the non-water component of rates? And in particular, what does it mean for, I guess, for people who live in rural areas such as myself, where we supply our own drinking water, but we still maybe tap into stormwater facilities, that kind of thing. So, as a ratepayer, what will that look like for me? How will I be invoiced? What will the water component look like? What will the non-water component look like? And if I'm living in a rural area, what does that
So what we're
mean for
approving
me?
today is a consultation document. So we'll take that question and we'll provide that answer, and we'll make sure that information is readily available on the
Yeah, well,
website,
I guess
rather
that's
than
my
trying
point.
to answer that right now.
Yeah,
But
I
it's-
wasn't.
yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting an answer to that. I'm just
Yeah.
merely pointing out
The
that
kind of
that's
thing.
the question that I would be asking as a ratepayer, and particularly a rural ratepayer.
Yes, so we will try. There will be some issues around projecting how that split's going to look and what that might mean in terms of that differentiation, but we'll make as much available as we can in terms of that. The other question, and I think that was raised, it was raised here again today, that what we're talking about in the paper is the cost of providing that service across the district. It's not the charges associated with that system once it's embedded.
Yeah.
So, whether
That's right.
it's the system that we used to try and get a comparison across the four councils, because
Yeah, that's right.
all of those councils have multiple different ways of rating. So,
Yeah.
water, we have fixed charge volumetric, we've got rural supplies, stormwater, you've got rural village, you've got district-wide, wastewater, you've got some areas that don't provide wastewater, so they don't get charged rates for it. And every one of those other councils probably has a dozen iterations each.
Yeah.
So we provided cost and then use that as a proxy
Yeah.
to give you a relative number. So
Yeah, I get that. It's
Yep.
just that people will.
That's right.
say,
So that
at the next level of detail, what other implications are there for how people are charged?
absolutely, we will look to do that. Just one thing to add to Martin. One of the other pieces of work that's happening, and it may come up, is the harmonisation conversation. There's a section in the paper that talks about that, which is basically retaining each council retains, I guess, a level of cost associated with the current operations, and that doesn't change until some point in the future when it becomes beneficial for that council to move to a harmonised pricing schedule. And I think the year for council, it's 24 years, reflects basically the lower costs for this council projected out into the future, and when do they match what you might be paying if you stayed on your own. So it's a section on that in the paper, and there's some more work going on that at the moment, and that will be available through the website. But because it doesn't change that fact that there's additional costs associated with those other councils, and their willingness to stay at a higher rate will have to be part of that conversation. But the harmonisation question is one that, if you look to the south, Wellington Water, as it stands at the moment, they've kept separate levels of service, separate budgets, separate systems to try and mitigate that. And I believe that that's one of the issues at the moment. They're trying to manage to get a more efficient and effective delivery of services by combining those. So, and again, harmonisation or not is subject to, it's 20 years into the future. What might happen in 3 years' time? We don't have a lot of control over that, and it's an assumption that you could stick with that system into the future, but that's further information that's potentially going to be available.
Yep. Thank you.
Great. Councillor Hanford.
Yeah, I was also quite curious to kind of unpack the time frame question and the implications of Bill 3 in terms of us then fronting up if there were any changes with that water services delivery plan, but I feel like that's been answered. This might be a question maybe more for Sue. It's noted in the paper that there's an extensive consultation plan with broad publicity that's been put in place to kind of help get the word out about just how crucial how crucial this decision is and the implications of it for all parts of our community and also for the long term. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about kind of what's included in there and give us a sense of exactly how we'll be making sure that the information is available in ways that's accessible to all demographics of our community and in ways that, all people can engage with.
I think Stu had a response to one of the previous questions too, so I'll invite you to do that as well if you like, Sue. Yep, your microphone's on.
Kia ora koutou. Thanks for the question, Sophie. So just to sort of touch on Shelley's point, our Have Your Say engagement platform will be the one source of truth, and that's where we'll hold all the key documents and supporting information to support this consultation. We've got some collateral that will go out into the community as well, so we will have information sheets that will direct people back to our Have Your Say platform. We've got a QR code too to make it easy for people to scan it, maybe access it on their phone. We'll be having an extensive social media campaign. We've got some radio adverts stood up as well. We are emailing ratepayers where we actually hold their information, because this is an important conversation that may impact their future rates. So we've got quite a full suite of things happening. We also have some pop-up activity happening across the district, and we will be sending you a pack later today or early tomorrow just outlining what that looks like with some supporting talking points and key messages.
Fantastic, thank you. Councillor Pravanov.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for staff for giving this presentation. I know some of the very good answers we've had in terms of answering some of the questions we had in public speaking time. One of the things to me, looking at the document and as a ratepayer, it's about taking ratepayers on a journey. And quite early on in the consultation document, it then starts talking about the two options that we're going to look at. But it doesn't actually really talk about how we got to those two options. And so when you look at the two, and I've sort of dug in, I think it was the 29th of November, and then we had an open briefing on the 18th of February, it actually spends quite a lot of time talking about, you know, us, how we've gone through that, and a lot more information than what is actually in the two, I think it's Appendix 2 and 4. But it's about putting those links in there so people can actually see how we've arrived at those two options. And it's not actually that clear that there were four options that we started off at. So it's just, you know, answering some of those questions with those links that provide, I suppose, our rationale that was done in a public forum. That's all I have to say, thank you. But other than that,
Great.
thank you.
Councillor Halliday.
Through you, Madam Chair, I just actually wanted to clarify a point of curiosity that I brought up on Tuesday. In the consultation document, there's a graph there that talks about the different average cost that's going to be for Kapiti Coast and the other three councils. Well, the question I asked was, would there be any chance of putting Wellington Water on that graph? And I was just wondering, could you remember what the answer was to that?
Yeah, it'd be off the top of the chart.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Just wanted to
What's the short
clarify that.
answer?
Thank you.
Could I just add to that, perhaps?
Thanks,
what
Martin.
I'm hearing is this has been evolving at quite a pace. There's been a lot of work done in the background, and navigating that story is something the community needs to understand and be easy to follow. So perhaps we work really closely with comms to make sure we can lay out that picture, that journey that you've all been on, so that when you get to the consultation document, this makes sense, because there's a lot in there, and I think that might be quite useful. We work with comms on that.
Thank you. So there are no more questions. So I'm going to move this from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Handford. Yeah, so I'd just like to thank staff for the work that's gone into this consultation document. I think it's really excellent. I have looked at other examples from around the country, and I think this consultation document lays out everything in a very clear and a way that's really easy to access. So I'd just like to congratulate staff on the effort that's gone in. And sounds like we have an excellent communications plan in place, so that's really good as well. I'd like to acknowledge Martin too for the work that's gone into this. Also the work that went into creating the water system that we have here in Kapiti. I don't know if many of you know that Martin used to be a manager here and has left for some time and come back to help us with this work. So it's really great to have you here. So, and Sean as well, of course. So we really look forward to hearing comments from the community around this. I think we're really lucky to be in a position where we have a strong business model in-house to put forward. because that will reduce setup costs for our community for a start. So I'd like to acknowledge all the work that's gone in over the years to put us in this position. And thank you to the public speakers who've come today, particularly concerned ratepayers. Yeah, thanks, Chris. Certainly some good points made today, and I hope you hear that they've been taken on board, and we will be making sure that we have a wealth of information and background data and history and numbers for people to have a look at should they be interested, because it is a huge decision and people need to be informed. So we really value that feedback. I'll pass to Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, just to note that in, I don't know why they always put F as the interesting one, but they have here again. So we are resolving to adopt the in-house business unit as the preferred future delivery option. They're just I mean,
as outlined in the consultation document.
Yeah, it's just so people are aware that that's what we're doing.
Yes.
You know, so it's not just adopting a whole paper. There's something quite specific here that we're recommending, basically. Yes.
Yeah. Councillor Halliday.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Look, as a second term councillor, I just wanted to acknowledge that this water conversation has been ongoing for a long time now, first with Labor and now with National. And I really wanted to, I think Nigel really highlighted it very well, that the issues that are being grappled with by both elected members and council, the contradictions, the change, the timeframes, the cost, the changing and evolving legislation, etc. It's been a hell of a challenge and a heck of a lot to get your head around and to digest, especially considering we moved from one option, i.e. through what Labor was doing, to a different one, and we had to get up to speed with that. My opinion, there also needs to be a government-based investment into this essential infrastructure, and I keep bringing that point up because this is essential infrastructure, and to me, that central government needs to be stepping up because that's part of governing this country, and just not the creation of another utility bill, just as power as such, which we're seeing what's happening with power at the moment. But that's what happens when you start getting the private sector involved in these, which we should never have done. This has been a very in-depth process. Now, so as I said, but you know, we are where we're at. This has been a very in-depth process to get to this point, and I support the preferred option. But we're very interested to see the feedback from our community. I want to acknowledge Standing Order 9.16 with regards to referendum, and note that in my opinion the requirements being non-binding from that referendum, we are really achieving our community's views by what we're about to go through as a process of consulting with our community. And again, looking forward to seeing those views. I'd like to thank council officers for the huge amount of work that has gone into getting this document prepared. It's a streamlined document by Crikey Charlie, you know, what's gone into creating that streamlined document. And also the work in both the awareness and education of elected members through this very legislative process. And Sean, a bit of a shout out to you and your team with regards to the condition of our network that puts us in the position that we are in, which is the envy of a lot of other councils around the country. And past decisions made that, from a political perspective, have cost people a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Halliday. Mr. Butler.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just got a slight query about F. So we're saying that the recommendation F resolves to adopt the in-house business unit as the preferred future delivery model for Kapiti Coast, blah, blah, blah. Is that putting some predetermination in place that we're saying this is the one we want to go with before we've gone through the consultation?
Yeah, so we have to identify a preferred option.
Yep.
And that's quite clear in the consultation document. I don't think it's a problem.
Okay. Would that be slightly better?
We'd still be free to go with the other option if the community came back and we were seeing some direction.
If it was overwhelming, we could change it. Just would that be better, slightly say, as KCDC's preferred future delivery option? I mean, I'm probably playing semantics here, but
I think it says that already in B.
Oh, in B.
I don't think there's a problem with the wording in the resolution. So unless somebody wants to move an amendment, they're as they stand.
Okay. Oh, I just wanted to double check on that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, good to get that clarification. Councillor Coe?
Yeah, just on that point, in regard to recommendation G, I do think there is some slight tweaking of the documentation required to make sure those linkages that we've discussed are put in.
I was just discussing that with the Chief Executive, and I was going to move a separate resolution around that. Perhaps I'll do it now, and I'll move H, approves any
Tweaks,
minor changes to the document to be
to give the CEO approval to
delegates the Chief Executive and the Mayor to make any changes in line with discussion today.
Yeah.
Discussion at this meeting.
Yeah.
So we're
That's
not going to
great.
make any
Yeah.
other changes. So it's just what
Yeah,
we've
because
discussed
in
today.
particular, I think on page 10, where we talk about the two options, I think it needs a reference to one of the last pages where we set out what the other options were, to make it clear, because otherwise you've got to read the whole document before you see the other options. So there's some minor changes like that that I think will make it more user-friendly, and we definitely need to get those linkages in.
So delegates the Mayor and Chief Executive the authority to make minor changes to the document. That will be fine. So that's H. So I've moved A through H, and it was seconded by Councillor Handford. I'll put that to the vote. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. That's carried. Sorry, against? That's carried. So now we move on to confirmation of minutes. Do I have a mover for those minutes? Moved by Councillor Wilson, seconded by Councillor Coe. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. And I'll ask for somebody to move us into public excluded. Moved by Councillor Coe, seconded by Councillor Warwick. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. And we'll take a 10-minute break. Thank you.
Because then we'll switch the chairs.